closer. So like maybe if we could all kind of come up just not past the third row. Could folks do that for me? Are we recording? So if we could, yeah, so folks could move forward. And then tell me what you need, baby. What time, how long do you need me to go? So, yeah, I won't do that. I'm a third generation Pentecostal preacher. You put yourself in a bad situation if you give me free license. So what I want to do is kind of give a framing of this particular time of year and this particular historical moment. And then perhaps give a bit of an assessment of the state of our movement here. And then open it up for some question and answer. I want to begin by acknowledging being here at this great institution in this great place. Your president, President Costello, who I count as a friend and who has been gracious to our struggle. And then my long-term friend I've known over 20 years, Dr. Jonathan Smith, who plays a mean organ, as well as been very amazing and capable in the position that he's been. And if I remember right, there's an essay you wrote on Michael Eric Dyson that wrestles with style and substance. You reference Marvin Gaye and how Marvin Gaye understood of himself that he was not the best singer on the block, but he needed to make a connection between style and substance. And so I want to use that as a frame and as a tribute to you to talk about what the ways in which the particular movement in Ferguson engages in style and substance. And that the stylistic differences of this particular historical moment have provided a bit of rancor among an older generation of activists who have not come to terms with the reality of a respectability politic in which one will save us. That no amount of respectability will save us. And now this is not to diminish the work of the great Higginbotham, who wrestles with the question and actually gives us the phrase respectability politics, denoting that at the turn of the century and thereon, black women deployed certain forms of respectability politics, given the fact that when we lived under a high level of racial terror, that race was performed. This is the work of the great Grace Elizabeth Held on the performance of race. Grace Elizabeth Held, in her text on the performance of race, talks about in the antebellum period, what are the ways in which black bodies performed race as a means of survival. So there was an instance where she recounts in her book, she talks about black slave woman. They announced the end of slavery. She comes up and she falls before her master and she says, "Master, please, we can't get away from you. You've been too good to us. How are we going to live without you?" Master says to her that you gotta go now. We won't have slavery anymore. When Master goes into the house, she turns around, throws up her dress, says, "Kiss my ass," and organizes the celebration party. That the way in which black bodies have performed respectability politics has been in part about a level of survival, but at the same time understanding that black soldiers, who are the epitome of black respectability, found themselves lynched and hanging from trees. And so there is no coverage, there is no possibilities of coming to understand the way in which race impacts black bodies and the way in which respectability can come to protect us. And so I want to talk about style and substance as a way to have a conversation about the way in which we struggle, and particularly here in Ferguson and greater St. Louis writ large, and to understand what I am characterizing as the age of Ferguson. And by the age of Ferguson, the age of Ferguson has three distinct features, and the age of Ferguson is characterized first and foremost by the occupation of public space. And that occupation of public space is not unique to Ferguson, but it is part and parcel of an international struggle on the question of the occupation of public space. So West Florissant was our Tahrir Square. And in addition to the occupation of public space, we see the challenging of traditional leadership. Al Sharpton cannot come on the street in Ferguson because there's been a rejection of traditional leadership. And then thirdly, the dominant characterization of the age of Ferguson is to come to terms with the calling into question that which previous generations have sought to become a part of. It is a questioning of modernity. Because what we see at this particular moment is a failure of modernity. The rise of Islamophobia, the rise of fundamentalism on the question, and this is where I agree with Slavoj Žižek, that we see the rise of the right wing in terms of fundamentalism and right wing Christianity is actually not a fight against Western civilization, but it is about the collapse of modernity. That when you look at the suicide bombers, many of them have master's degrees from Western institutions. They've been told that the promise of modernity is that if you participated in global capital, if you became more Western in your feature and your function, the world would be better. But by the time they get back to their country, the same dictator is in power that was there before they left. And they find themselves in high levels of poverty and economic deprivation. And we see this particularly emerging with the Arab Spring, because part and parcel of the rebellion over and against these structures vis-a-vis Occupy movement and the Arab Spring, and now the work of the rebellion in Ferguson, has to do with not only the economic deprivation that has been present in people's lives, it has to do with a level of disrespect. And so we see in Tunisia, the dear brother, the vendor who sets himself on fire, he sets himself on fire not because he was poor, not because he didn't have access to decent health care, not because he was suffering under certain high levels of dictatorship and the policing of the way in which he moves through time and space. It was the level of disrespect. And so what is at stake in the age of Ferguson is a question of dignity. And so part of what we see in our rebellion here in Ferguson has to do with the fact that they left our son's body in the street for 4.5 hours. Not that black people had not been killed before. Not that we had their character assassinated after they have died. But to leave his body in the street for 4.5 hours is to conjure up a kind of cosmic memory, a kind of ancestral trauma in which the history of black people, is the vast majority of our history in America, is that we have not been able to bury our dead with dignity. And so that level of disrespect and indignity becomes too much for people to bear. And so what characterizes our historical moment in our struggle in this particular moment has to do with a generation who's made a decision that they will not tolerate the disrespect, because, to be quite honestly, African Americans have always had an interesting relationship with America, because no matter how revolutionary or reactionary you are, you have a fundamental understanding that this thing is set up a little different for you. And that we have had options, that there would be those of us who would lock our hair and we would change our names. And we would become part of a revolutionary tradition of struggle. Very few of us will take up arms. We will construct a mythical African past that never existed. But it is like that moment in Toni Morrison's Beloved where they're talking, Denver's in conversation with Seth, and she asked her, she says, y'all always talk about sweet home as though it was better. But that interesting intervention linguistically and literary device, she said, it's not better. It's just different. And so the construction of a mythical African past, in which is not necessarily better, but it's different than the hell that we are catching. Some of us will elect a pull yourself up by the bootstrap, perform respectability politics, understanding that you got to be twice as good just to get the opportunity to be told no. But in that tepid agreement with America, There's been a fundamental understanding that you will not disrespect us. And so disrespecting Michael Brown by leaving his body and disrespecting a community, disrespecting his mother became too much. And that within the context of the particular moment, there's a certain irony that we see the emergence of a Black Lives Matters movement with a black president in the White House. Because it is in part a reaction over and against what, particularly like the young people in this room who turned out in record numbers for Obama. And it has been revealed to them that the emperor has no clothes. Combined with the transference of over $200 million in military apparatus to local police departments in 2013. Combined with the other material conditions in which, and although we want to raise, and I'm going to name some of the material conditions that they bail themselves out in statistics and numbers, but part and parcel, the struggle of Ferguson is not primarily a struggle of policy. It is primarily a struggle at the existential level. Who are we going to be as human beings? And so, continuing with the numbers, right? The numbers are that in Ferguson, Missouri, over 21,000 African Americans, 21,000 people in the city, 15,000 African American, 10,000 of them have arrest warrants, over 23,000 tickets issued in between 2013 and 2014, because 1/4 of the city's budget comes from ticketing. A kind of poverty tax, which our dear friends at the Art City Defenders have characterized so well in their research. And so that these material conditions, and particularly my family understanding there's something particular about St. Louis, where there was no rebellion when Martin Luther King died, because there was a capacity, particularly among the petty bourgeois clergy class, to seduce the people into not rebelling. But let us, and this is not to say that I am calling for armed resistance or that I am calling for the destruction of material property, but let us be sure that looting and rioting in a consumerist society has latent, if not manifest, political content. And in that context, where there had been no strong form of organization save the work of Moore, and before Moore, the work of the organizational black struggle, a little work happening around Fight for 15, and some work around municipal court reform. But the primary form of social engagement in St. Louis, Missouri has always been primarily a politic that wrestled with and discussed the ways in which intercommunal violence comes to impact the lives of black people. For over 20 years, there has been drug marches, particularly among the work of Brother Khatib Wahid and the work that he was engaging in through the community centers programs here in St. Louis, Missouri. The community education programs that were part and parcel of the St. Louis public school system, in which they did drug marches through gang-infested communities, shutting down drug houses. The vast and the secondary level of black political capital went around the construction industry, in which they were using highway shutdowns to put pressure on construction companies to hire black contractors. Those were the primary areas of black political struggle, save the work of the great Ivory Perry, great revolutionary here in St. Louis, Missouri. But part of the struggle in St. Louis, Missouri, not only at the level of wrestling with intercommunal violence, trying to get access to decent and living wage through the construction industry, our primary work has been primarily a work of an existential struggle, particularly through our rich musical tradition. Cleophas Robinson being one of them. They're part of the black musical tradition of St. Louis, Missouri, and the linguistic tradition of which Maya Angelou, Miles Davis, and my personal favorite, the great Donny Hathaway. That part of the way in which we have struggled in St. Louis has been at the cultural level. And that cultural level combined with the reality of a struggle over and against the ways in which intercommunal violence impacts our community. So it's one of the interesting things to me when people raise that question that St. Louis, Missouri, the people in St. Louis are not concerned about intercommunal violence. Their entire organizations, such as Black Better Family Life, whose sole purpose is to combat that. What we've had for years in St. Louis is a primary focus on intercommunal violence. What we have not had in sustained areas, the way in which we've come to define revolutionary struggle. And so the age of Ferguson makes it unique, in which a generation of young people find it intolerable and they take to the street. And that taking to the street again is linked to a global phenomenon, because you can't understand Ferguson without situating in a global phenomenon. And that global phenomenon has to do with an understanding of the collapse of the global economy in 2008, where over 40 million people go into poverty overnight. Then you see Occupy Wall Street. Then you see the Arab Spring. Then you see, because part and parcel what the people are coming to understand, that there's been a collapsing of the public space, because the primary public space in America is the mall. It is a space where random citizens and non-citizens will gather in a space to have a public encounter with people that they normally would not have a public encounter with, which is a marketized space, a space that is primarily about consumption, primarily a space that is about participating in capitalism as a form of patriotic duty. And so given the collapsing of the public space, the shredding of social infrastructure, the denial of the capacity of students to participate in their own democratic future, the occupation of public space takes on a unique and existential importance, because it's about a reclamation of that which has been taken from us. And so with that in mind, that this occupation of public space has to do with the ways in which there is a countervailing narrative over in which the primarily form of public discourse and democratic dialogue is subjugated to a neoliberal formation that is characterized by privatization, individualism, and militarization. And so the struggle then becomes a counterweight, a counter-narrative over and against the ways in which the neoliberal frame, in a broader context of the collapse of the global economy, comes to help us understand this particular moment that produces a particular kind of generation of struggle. That again, it's about the occupation of public space, the rejection of traditional leadership, and the calling in question modernity and that which previous generations have sought to integrate into. And that part of that third characterization in terms of rejection of modernity has to do with the emperor has no clothes, and it has to do with unique ways in which people come to understand what are the possibilities of struggle, which we see in part with the resurgence of certain black nationalist discourse. And that the resurgence of that certain form of black national discourse has to do with exclusive black spaces, has to do with black liberation discourse that has become so popular within the framework of our particular moment. And what is unique about this particular moment has to do with the ways in which that it is not a simply rejection of traditional leadership. It is not a rejection of what actually happened in traditional leadership, let me say. So, for instance, in August 1966, Martin Luther King's approval ratings at 12% nationally. In that same time frame, given the Pew studies and the Hall studies that were done between 1963 and 1961 and 1968, Martin Luther King's highest approval rating is 12%. His negatives are at 57%. 57% of Americans believe that the freedom rides and that Martin Luther King are hurting their cause. 55% of Americans believe that Black Lives Matters writ large are hurting their movement and hurting their cause. And while it is true that this is not your mama's or your daddy's civil rights movement, I would make an argument to Tef Pole's statement and make an argument that this is not your mama's or your daddy's civil rights movement mythology. And that part of the mythology has to do with this historical moment, which has to do with nostalgia. And nostalgia is about a past, is about a romantic past that never existed because the present is too unbearable and the future is unforeseeable. This is why I say that our struggle is at the existential level. It is simply about it is not simply about public policy. It's not simply about resources. It's not simply about positions of power. It's about who we fundamentally are as a nation and what kind of people are we going to be as we encounter death, dread, and despair that is mediated by the state. And so what are the ways in which we come to terms with wrestling with this existential question, which is the primary question of the age of Ferguson? Over and against the mythology. And I think in part the way in which we come to terms with the realities of the particular state of our movement is acknowledging the existential crisis that we are facing and honoring the fact that none of us have all of the answers. That we are engaging in a Nieberian formulation, that we're finding what the great Reinhold Niebuhr called finding proximate solutions to insoluble problems. Because the wonderful thing about these creatures who occupy the universe called humans, that they are going to find various ways to be unkind to one another, and that the possibilities of the ways in which the state can manipulate, hold at bay, and tamper the unkindness of other human beings. And so one of the questions for us is in our struggle is, what role does the state have to play? That is a fundamental question before our movement. Now I, being a democratic socialist, believe that the state has a role to play. That the collecting of taxes and resources, somebody got to be responsible for ensuring that we have highways and roads, and that there are some regulations on the ways in which the market functions. And I do believe that there must be democratic checks on the market. And by those democratic checks on the market, it has to do with perhaps the possibility of doing away with publicly traded institutions. It's about a checking of the market. The great Harvey Cox, 1995, in Atlantic Magazine, writes a powerful essay called "The Market is God." That the way we talk about the market as though it is all-seeing, all-knowing, and it is definitely ever-present, even in our love relationships when they become primarily transactional. But what role will the state play in the shaping of the way in which various humans engage in one another, and the control and the access to democratic resources, particularly the ways in which to meet human needs? And I do believe there is the possibility of that within the context of a radical democratic society. It is part and parcel of the work of the great Michael Harrington, and in his book, The Other America, which sets the stage for John F. Kennedy's war on poverty and the failed attempt of Lyndon B. Johnson. But the question is in terms of what role does the state have to play? And part of understanding of what role the state has to play, that role in terms of the way in which citizens engage the state cannot be primarily an electoral engagement. Voting is the minimum activity of a citizen within the framework of a Western democracy. You don't get a chance to cast your vote, and you're done. That in fact, Martin Luther King reminds us that social movements are thermostats. They set political climate. Elections are thermometers. They measure political climate. And that, so what is the role in terms in which we encounter the state is that primary, that initial, not primary but not sole, that primary engagement of those of us who are concerned about the shaping and the existential definition of democracy begins with what we call the turn up. We must stay in the streets. Because staying in the streets creates the political climate within the framework for us to possibly have some engagement with the state in which we're able to gain a certain amount of resources and possibilities. For instance, when you look at when you look at the New Deal, FDR, our comrades are calling for, the socialists and the communists are calling for a guaranteed income, which we see much of effect in Europe. So particularly in London, you don't see the kind of poverty that you see in America. Because there's a guaranteed income. So our comrades are calling for guaranteed income. We get Social Security. So Social Security is a compromise and a defeat for the left, but creates the possibility for elders to be taken care of, even though it's being shredded. But in that context, you don't get Social Security without comrades calling for guaranteed income. Same thing, when you look at the context of the 1960s, not only do we get the Voting Rights Act of 1964, and so I confuse them, Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 65, we also get the first expansion of immigration. Universal pre-K in terms of Head Start. And so what is happening is that through the participation of black bodies in the street, opening up the political space, the democracy's possibilities of itself are reconceived and other public policy emphasis happen. Because we've created a context in struggle. Because social movements raise the temperature. Public policy elections measure it. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so part of what we've happened here, and particularly what we've had nationally, what we've had some 99% of meager political advancements on questions of restraining police behavior and disciplining them, has to do with what happens in the street. That every level of government is having to wrestle with the discourse around Black Lives Matters, and in particular, you can turn on a television show, particularly any television show in which police play a central feature, and you're going to hear somebody on the show say, "We don't want another." That's every level of the culture is coming to wrestle with what you did. Because social movement has infected the public discourse in such a way that we need to come with it. Even the social movement, particularly young people in the street of Ferguson, and let us be clear, there is a Ferguson effect, and that Ferguson effect is as such. You kill somebody, and we got 5 seconds of it on video. We take him to the street. All over the world, in London, they are shutting down Heathrow Airport as we speak. Recently, particularly J. Marie, my writing partner, we're going to sing a little bit later, has just returned from Palestine. And in Palestine, they say from Ferguson to Palestine. Because there's an understanding of the age of Ferguson not simply reduced to a small town that most people have never heard of, but it has to do with a fundamental understanding of the rearrangement of the global economy. And so the question before our struggle is not only what is the role of the state, how are we going to engage the state through social movement, organization, and at a tertiary level, electoral politics. It is very significant here that just on Tuesday there was a number of people on the ballot who were progressives who emerged out of movement. They had been tear gassed, and then they were on ballots. Kim Gardner, and we will remind her that she is in office because of this struggle. And so that is one way as a model to talk about the engagement. And then secondarily, at the international level, both internationally, but also to have a discourse about intersectionality. And intersectionality not as an abstraction. It is not simply about checking off. If you got enough queer folks, enough black folks, enough gender non-conforming folks. It is about a fundamental understanding that the empire is intersectional. For instance, when I was in Palestine in 2012, we were tear gassed in Nabisela with that great revolutionary family, the Tamimis. When I arrived on the streets in Ferguson, I recognized the tactics of the police because I had seen them in Palestine. In fact, my body was as such that my body physically remembered being in Palestine when I was on the streets in Ferguson. The same company that makes the tear gas that was shot at us in Palestine, in Nabisela, is the same company that makes the tear gas that was shot at us in Ferguson. And the same tear gas that was used against protesters in Tunisia, same tear gas used against protesters in Egypt by the military. The vast majority of policing agencies, of the 60 some odd police agencies, particularly and also here in St. Louis, Missouri, the vast majority of those large agencies have been trained by Israelis. This is a fact. And I'm not talking about something I read in a book. I'm talking about something I saw with my own eyes and that I experienced. And so given the intersectionality of the empire, our movement must be intersectional. That we must always be looking at the ways in which global capital is functioning and impacting the quality of life. This is what we see at universities all over the country, particularly the balkanization of university and its obsession with STEM. That the obsession with STEM has to do with market discourse, and that many universities, the vast majority of money that they received is for the production of the market through research and often military. So there's always a perennial struggle over if we're going to keep African American studies alive. We're going to keep the classics department alive. Or we're going to keep the humanities alive. We're going to keep the arts alive. Because the external pressure on the university has to do with the way in which global capital is coalescing, because the most sustained business industry in the world is the military. And so we have to be intersectional because the empire is intersectional. And to be sure, the great American empire, and I am like the great James Baldwin, I love America. So I love the ideal of America, and I reserve the right to be her most critical son, because that's what love is. The great James Baldwin says to us that an artist's quarrel with their nation is a lover's quarrel. That powerful essay, The Creative Process. And the great Albert Camus, my soulmate, and I think the greatest of the existentialists, although Sartre would disagree with me, says the artist must embrace that state of being that most humans must necessarily avoid, and that's the state of being alone. And that's where the existential comes in. What kind of human being are you going to be in the face of struggle? What are the ways in which you're going to wrestle? The great Tolstoy said, I wakes up every morning and I try to squeeze the slave out of me, drop by drop. What kind of human being you going to be in the face of struggle? And so what is the role of the state? How do we come to terms with a certain form of intersectionality? And I think the most pressing question for us is what kind of human being are we going to be? Franz Fanon says we struggle not only for the product of struggle, which is freedom, but we benefit from the process. So in our struggle to become free, we ought to become a little freer. What are the ways in which we're tampering misogyny, transphobia, homophobia in the context of our movements? And then lastly, on a pastoral note, having considered the age of Ferguson characterized by the occupation of public space, the rejection of traditional leadership, and the calling into question of modernity, and the ways in which we come to terms with what is the role of the state and how do we maintain an intersectional analysis, and what ways are we going to be human. Paulo Freire says that our only vocation is to be fully human. That we will not internalize part of what I've talked about in our brief time together is a dialogical assumption about that we live in an empire, that America has over 1,000 bases around the world. We are indeed in the heart of an empire. And so how do we live in an empire and not let the empire get inside of us? And part of what the empire does is shame. It shames black folks. It shames women. It shames those who do not ascribe to a mythological construction of cis heteronormativity. So when we disagree with each other, how do we have conversations face to face and not on Twitter and Facebook? That we talk directly to one another. Because what Twitter and Facebook are ultimately features of the market, which are tools that can be manipulated in proximity of social movements. But they carry with them an individualism, a privatization, and I would dare say even a militarization, that they're neoliberal at the outset. And so that those kind of, what, if I might be a bit Pentecostal, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. That the spirit of the empire saturate these tools and instruments in such a way that we begin to reproduce them in our relationships uncannily, because those intrinsic to those neoliberal formations are those values. How many likes we get, how many retweets we get. Not about substance, not about whose life it impacts, but the notion of celebrity. And so how then do we struggle to not let the empire get inside of us? I am guilty of it. And so I don't stand before you as some kind of moral arbiter, but rather a human being wrestling to make some sense of the world and to try to struggle and leave the world a little bit better than I found it. And so then, if our time together has been for me to provide answers, I have failed you. But I want to wrestle with a new set of questions, because that's what the age of Ferguson requires, a new set of questions. It's not simply about tempering police behavior. It's about what is the very nature of policing, and are they necessary? It's not simply about having a black face in a high place. It's about changing of the place itself. And if you're willing to wrestle with those questions, they'll say of you that stood a generation of men and women and gender non-conforming folk who were willing to risk all for a story bigger than themselves and older than themselves. And it is not the question of whether or not we arrived. The question is whether we were willing to fight and that we would be faithful on the journey, because there's a difference between faithfulness and success. And so my question before you is, will you be faithful? For those who do not matter, for there are names you do not know and faces you have not seen who depend on you. Hebrews 11:1 says that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. That somebody willed you here, and that you're the substance of what they hope for and the evidence of what they cannot see. And if you are faithful to that, they'll say of you, well done, well done, well done. Thank you. Can we do some Q&A?
Yeah. So, give him another round of applause, y'all. Another round of applause. We're gonna open it up to some Q&A real quick, just to get you out to rub some more rub elbows with our speaker. Any questions in the audience that you can just project and ask your question? If not, we can move on to the next part and get ready for the next part of the session. But any questions from the audience? I'll bring this mic around. Any questions, anybody? Just in the interest of getting it recorded. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. I appreciate you so much, Reverend Sekou. Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to keep up the tradition of a lot of the panels, white men have been asking questions, so I wasn't going to go into that, but I am. But my question is, what's your advice for someone who wants to be faithful to what they believe, wants to be faithful, to living counter to the empire and dismantling white supremacy and all these systems of oppression? But like, what advice do you have for for me personally, on how to be happy and how to make a living while not becoming like the empire, like you said, or furthering, perpetuating white supremacy?
Well, I think that one of the realities is that, we live in a capitalist economy and we got to eat. I mean, that's just there ain't no guaranteed income in America. So that's the reality, and so people work jobs. They do work that they don't necessarily want to do. So that's just kind of, you know what I mean? But I think part for me is, and again, not as a moral arbiter, but somebody who's wrestling with the question, that how does one attempt to live out one's life in a way that, in part, about our daily encounters? Like the people in our lives, the people who are near us, the people around us. Are we loving each other through it, even in the midst of it, right? Like, one of the things is that one of our challenges, I think oftentimes we treat our friends like enemies, like the call-out culture. So Reverend Sekou is probably going to say something sexist. Probably. Right. I'm probably going to say something, and probably transphobic and queerphobic. I'm probably going to say that, right? But if you're in relationship with me, you should come directly to me versus playing it out on Twitter and Facebook. Right? Because again, that's about shaming culture. So what are the ways in which we're not shaming each other, but loving each other, and that accountability is not an abstraction, right? So, because a lot of times the buzzword in movement space is that we need to be accountable, and I'm going to hold you accountable. But if you don't know my children's name, you can't hold me accountable. If you didn't ask me what's in my refrigerator, you can't hold me accountable. You can be like the empire and attempt to shame me, right? but you can't hold me accountable. And so what are the ways are we in authentic, and for me, one of the ways to answer your question is, who do you eat dinner with? Right? And so for me, my kitchen table is a place of movement building. Right? We break bread together. I mean, I only can cook one thing, so they're going to eat this. I think there's some people in the room can attest to that. Hey, I only cook one thing, and there's going to be some fish, some with arugula, and some kale, right? But the issue is that, so who do you break bread with? Becomes a real question for me. And I think that the accountability for me comes across the dinner table. Right? That's where my accountability is. And it might be I'm a Southerner and I'm my grandmama's child. Right? So what are the ways in which, and that's one question, right? I think that's one way we can try to remain faithful. Because of breaking bread with people requires of you to come to wrestle with the hard questions. Particularly, at least for me, there have been times where tensions have been high in our movement and one faction don't like the other faction and all that stuff. And I said, all right, we're going to eat, but we ain't going to talk politics. We just going to eat together. And let that work. And so that becomes, I'm not asking you to answer as a rhetorical question, but I think one way we remain accountable and faithful has to do with who we break bread with. You know, white folks coming to me all the time, and they be like, Reverend Sekou, I'm so anti, I went to one of them what's them thing? The white, where you learn how not to be racist. Yeah, them things, So white folks come to me and be like, I went to an anti-racism workshop and, and they got all the bread, the step up, step back and all that, right? And I always wonder when they say this, and this is not the case for me in Ferguson or in the greater St. Louis. They'll say, so my next question to them is that, have you ever been to a black funeral? Does somebody love you enough that when they put their mama or their baby in the ground, they want you standing next to me? They want you standing next to them. Now, one of the things about Ferguson, in reality, I have seen many of the folks in this room who ain't black at black funerals. Because they understood that it was not simply about the turn up in the street. It wasn't simply about checking white folks. It wasn't simply about being the wokest white person in the room. But it was about when Antonio Martin's mama was wailing at her son's grave that you made sure she had a plate to eat. Right? That's a different kind of relationship in movement. Right? So who do you break bread with, and who do you bury people with? All right.
All right, we got one more question.
Do me a favor, baby, and I'll shut up. We're going when we go ahead and get ready to run.
Okay. Can we get one more in?
Yeah, give me two back to back, and I'll answer them right together.
All right, two back to back. All right, so we'll start here. We have one hand in the back and another brother right here. Right here, and then let me get one from somebody young. And okay. Well, you got your first one up is coming right here. That's it. How old are you, Larry? 20.
All right. Well, let one and give me one from the sister.
Okay. All right. Cool.
All right. How's it going? This is regarding the clock tower Accords.
I can do two things
at once. All right. Well. All right, regarding the clock tower Accords, what's your advice to the university on achieving goals with or without funding? And do you think that's possible or not?
What? I didn't hear the university's goal.
Yeah, regarding the clock tower Accords, what's your advice to the university on achieving goals without funding? And
without funding?
Yes.
He said, "Is that possible?"
No. You got to put up or shut up. I mean, and one of the challenges. So, what's unique about St. Louis University, right, is that your president comes to office on the day that Michael Brown is killed. I think he's installed on that actual day, right, or right the week before. Right around that case. And he's the first non-cleric to head this 200-some-odd-year-old. These are 200-300 years. Okay, almost 200-year-old institution. Combined with many of the pockets in the room of your alumni thought that St. Louis U was in Ferguson. So your not acceptance, but people who actually came went down. Then they killed the baby, Von Derek Myers, right by you, and you got the big image going around the world, the big St. Louis University archway with riot police in front of it. So that really didn't help him out at all. Right? He ain't a cleric, and he actually has a tendency towards social justice. Right? So there's nothing really working in his favor. The pressure that you all, and what's so powerful about the Accords is that I don't think y'all really understand in the history of student occupations. Never in the history, sometimes it took years, right? 5 days to get those Accords. That is unprecedented. Right? And that's in part you had an administration willing to wrestle with the question with student combined with a significant amount of community pressure. That's unprecedented. Right? And so the question is what resources you can snatch down, but you're going to have to come up with some resources that you can't do without. I'm sorry, go ahead, baby.
All right, here's that next question.
Okay,
The younger person.
All right, and we'll do the other ones just back to back, and then, all right.
Cool. My question, I was once told by someone this idea that we should, as activists, we should never bleed in public.
Never what?
We should never bleed in public.
Say more.
So my question, that's a statement. My question is, how do we go about creating more vulnerable spaces for us to just like be authentic with one another in the midst of such trauma, really?
So help me understand it a little more when you said so give me an example of bleeding in public.
So I think the context of what was said was that as like figureheads or like recognizable faces, that it's our job. It's like a very masculine idea that we should be strong and like not be emotional or feminine. And so I'm wondering, how can we work about creating a culture where it's okay to not be okay?
Okay, got it.
Can you speak to the necessity of coalition building as we move forward? Because as one looks at it, Ferguson is just the flashpoint. That this is not the beginning or the end, and that everything is on the table. When you look at it like that, it looks insurmountable. But if we build the coalitions and strategically look at what we're doing, then we can attack multiple fronts, because we are being attacked on multiple fronts.
Okay, so coalition, how not to be okay in public, and then you got one more, baby, right here and right there. And we'll take both of those and I answer them, and we're gonna sing a little bit.
Can you share any reflections or observations on the ethos and the pathos of the African diaspora continuum in the United States for the black family in the 21st century?
You got it. You don't have a mic? Oh, he got it. You can take the, what you call it. And give me one more. There was one back here, I thought.
Hi, thank you so much. That was one of the most interesting lectures I've heard in a long time.
Thank you.
There's a Belgian philosopher named Chantal Mouffe who talks about radical pluralist democracy. I'm sure you know her. Radical pluralist democracy. And she has this great idea, I think, that democracy should be an ever receding horizon. We should never have this feeling of like, okay, that's it, we've got democracy now, because then we become hegemonic. So I just wondered what you thought of that.
Okay, thank you. So, a couple things. So, to be honest to your question, I don't know. I don't know how, right? I mean, there have been, and it probably has to do with me being a straight black man thinking that I'm the next Martin Luther King. I mean, every black preacher, they're lying if every one of us think we the next Martin Luther King. We're gonna give the I Have a Dream speech, and it's gonna be a beautiful thing. Because the way I was trained, right, the people who trained me, is that you don't bleed before the people, right? And I think that shit has a lot to do with domestic violence. I think it has to do with the way in which black men take liberties with women's bodies, because if we're carrying so much pressure, we feel like we've earned the right to sleep with whoever we want to sleep with, even when we're in committed relationships, right? So I understand there's some downfalls to the model, but so I actually don't have that answer. I know I have friendships that I can be broken in, right? I know there are arms I can collapse in, right? Like my oldest sister, when the world get rough, I just go literally crawl in her lap and tell her about the mean old police, right? I know I have those authentic relationships. And another question for me is that how do you create that? Right? While moving on. Right? While kind of doing it. So I'm just thinking of an instance. I feel like me and Caleb been in this situation a lot of times, like where it's crazy in the streets, and I think Jonathan, and that we've had to say to each other, suck it up. Right? Or, Sekou, you need to be right here. I don't need you doing nothing else. Right? And then there are arms I can collapse into afterwards. Because one of my concerns on the question, and this is also generational, you millennials, y'all got to talk about y'all feelings and process and all that, right? I'm out of a generation as an Xer, and by who I was trained by, I'm a soldier. I take orders. Right? And that's a different disposition, and I don't think it's the healthiest one. It's just the one I know the best. And so honestly, I don't have the answer in that question. I feel my mind immediately jumps to crisis. And so in a crisis, I don't think or at least I don't afford myself the right to lose my shit, particularly if I got 500 people standing behind me. I got to hold that shit just till I get out of jail. And then I can let loose, right? And so I think in more intimate spaces, that possibility is like, so if we in the action council and I'm getting on Kayla's damn nerves, she can just cuss me out and we be done with it, right? We can fight there. Broad public space, you know what I'm saying? But I do know this, there are moments where the human emotion is going to be the human emotion, right? So that particularly when we were at that 100 days that the police were on the street and I would be lecturing and traveling, like I would weep through entire lectures. So I would give that lecture, tears rolling down my face the whole time. So the body gonna do what the body gonna do, the soul gonna do what the soul gonna do. But to really answer your question, I said all I had to say is I don't know. And once you find out, you help me out, okay? In terms of coalition building, I think coalition plays two ways. We can talk about coalition building across, about the ways in which in times kind of up the hierarchy, so how our on-the-ground activists in conversation with the powers. So for instance, John Doyer, the lawyer who wrote the Civil Rights Act, was talking to SNCC activists every day while he was writing it. I was privileged to spend some time with him and Bob Moses in particular, who as they were talking about the conversation of being on the ground in Mississippi, writing the Voting Rights Act. So at the hierarchical level, but I also think we need broad conversation. I actually believe in a multiracial democracy. I actually believe in it. I actually believe, given the fact that America is unique in human history in terms of wrestling with the possibility of a multiracial democratic civilization, that's unique in human history. This is why democracies are so rare, when it's just all one group of people. And then you add in a whole bunch of black folks and some Latinos and some gender non-conforming folks, it makes it a little messy, right? So I want to wrestle with that, right? So what are the ways in which broad coalition internationally, structurally, that is about reimagining civilization? I mean, I completely agree. I actually don't know that that Belgian philosopher, but I think that my grandmama, who was the greatest philosopher in the world, with her third grade education, she would say it this way: I thank God that I'm not what I was and I'm not what I'm gonna be. That it was a making. Paul talks about this notion of those of us who are being saved. If we're gonna make a salvific application to democratic discourse, that it is not constrained by religious normalcy and contradictions and conservatism. I think the way in which we come to understand that democracy is an organism, is living, is breathing, they're going to be always. I'm pretty sure the founding fathers was like, straight, we got it. Property owning men, they can vote, we good to go, right? Right? But African Americans heard the words, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal and that they're endowed with, they're created by a certain amount of inalienable rights, and among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They heard that word and intervened. Right? Queer folks heard that word and they intervened to expand democratic possibilities. So I think to be not Nibirian about it, Paul Niebuhr, we find approximate solutions to insoluble problems. In terms of, I want to begin with the end word of your question, which is family. Because when we talk about family in America, we're usually talking about a husband and wife living in the suburbs, 2.5 children, and a dog named Buffy. Cool. Right? That if we're going to have a conversation about African constructions of family, particularly, is it in Nigeria, is it among the Yoruba, that there is no word for cousin, right? There's no word for cousin. There's only brother, sister. And I think there may not be a word for aunt, right? Or an uncle, right? So there's only mother, father. So that rearranges the way in which family is constructed. So if there is something about Africa that I want to name in terms of the construction of family, it is not the patriarchal construction of family that is nuclear, that is isolating. Like, I believe there are high levels of domestic violence to deal with, in part, not only about patriarchy and not only about men and their violence, but it's also the violent construction of family in which you just got the husband and the wife with a bunch of kids running around the goddamn house. Y'all gonna get into it. There just ain't no question. But if you got aunts and uncles and play mamas and play cousins, they come and get out that house. Give me these babies. So I want to conceive, and I think queer folks do this a lot, conceive of family in a way that dissipates those constructions. Am I making sense? So in that sense, if I want to talk about an African family, I want to talk about a way in which we construct family in which there's only brothers and sisters. Does that make sense? Right? Now, are there Africanisms present? Right? I reject, what's your professor's name? Book on religion. You know, I mean, I was about to tell his business. He married the young woman and he wear riding boots sometimes. What's his name? You know him, teach African, black religion scholar. What's his name? Roberto. Roberto actually acts as though Africa left, but it didn't. Black Pentecostalism, and in the streets of Ferguson. Lots of drumming. Right? So, anyway, I'm through talking. This is what I really want to do is sing. My name is Reverend Sekou. This is J. Marie with Reverend Sekou and the Holy Ghost. Amber, who teaches here on the drums. And so we're going to sing a little bit because this is the only thing that's getting me free. I can hear my neighbor crying, saying I can't breathe. And now I'm in the struggle, saying I can't leave. We're calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop, no, until the people are free. Oh, I can hear my neighbor crying, saying I can't breathe. And now I'm in the struggle, saying I can't leave. We're calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. Say that with us. I can hear my neighbor. I can hear saying I can't breathe, saying, and now I'm in the struggle. Now I'm in the struggle, saying I can't leave. Saying I can't leave. We're calling out the violence. Calling out the violence of the racist police. And we ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop. Yeah, until the people are free. Say it one more time like you mean it. I can hear my neighbor crying, saying I can't breathe. And now I'm in the struggle. Now I'm in the struggle. Saying I can't leave. We're calling out the violence of the racist police. And we ain't gonna stop, no, until the people are free. Now come on, stand as you're able. Hear my neighbor cry, saying I can't breathe. And now I'm in the struggle, saying I can't leave. We are calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop, no, until the people are free. We ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop. I can't hear you. We ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop. No. We ain't gonna stop. Hey, we ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop until the people are free.
This amp is wicked. It's up to you. Welcome home.
All right, we're gonna do what? We got a little more time, baby. All right, we'll do two more.
Super cute.
No matter where you are on life's journey, or where you're coming from, You can always call this place home. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Hey. No matter where you are on life's journey. Or where you're coming from. You can always call this place home. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Welcome home. Welcome home. Wars and rumors of wars are never ceasing, and hoping tomorrow's ever fleeting. And our dreams have been broken into 1,000 pieces, but we'll still find a reason for believing. No matter where you are on life's journey, or where you're coming from, you can always call this place home. Hey! No matter where you've been or what you've done. Hey! Welcome home. Welcome home. Lay your head upon my beating chest, and I'll wipe away your tears. And when it's all said and done, I will always be, no matter where you are on life's journey, or where you're coming from. You can always call this place home. No matter where you've been or what you've done. No matter where you've been or what you've done. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Hey. No matter where you've been or what you've done. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Say that to each other. No matter where you've been. No matter where you've been or what you've done. No matter where you've been or what you've done. No matter where you've been or what you've done. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Say one more more time. No matter where you've been or what you've done. So look, movement spaces are be spaces where everybody is welcome. Maybe that's what I was talking about, right? No matter where you've been or what you've done. Trouble in my way, I gotta cry sometimes. Trouble in my way, and I gotta cry sometimes. Lay awake at night, but that's alright, 'cause I know the people gon' fix it. This I know for sure. I know. The people gon' fix it. I know. The people gon' fix it. So I have a request. Y'all can leave, but I want to hear J. Marie sing "Pastime." That's what I want to hear. It's the best song on the album. Jay and I met. I was washing pepper spray off of them in Cleveland. Kayla was on the bus yelling at me to come on.
Oh, were you?
Yes.
It was time to go.
And we didn't have any conversation, but it was just, this is how you get pepper spray off you. And I met them again in Oakland, and we were on our way to a protest, and Jay was like, I know you washed pepper spray off of me. And I was like, you gotta be a little more specific, because I done wash pepper spray off a lot of people. Jay played this song for me. I wound up at their house, played this song for me, and I cried, and we wrote 11 songs in 6 days. We raised the money from the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Anthony Grimes is here from Fellowship of Reconciliation, also co-led the delegation to Palestine. And we raised some money and recorded an album, and I think this is our 48th show this year since January. And so, J. Marie Hill, the Holy Ghost herself, "Pastime."
I'm here to hold you, shot down in cold blood. Sister, sister, I know I'm late. My hands are bloody and that's on me. Love, love, you love my body. Love my body, but not my soul. Baby, baby, I dream you loving me, not killing me. Mia, we've made it this far. You and me, our strength we say, buddy, buddy, don't give up now. 'Cause 'cause you were always meant to live. Stranger, it's time to love us. Know us, fight for us. But stranger, it's past time to love me. 'Cause my time has come too early. Say her name. 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 Corin Gay. Say her name. There's power in the name. Say her name. There's power in the name. Say her 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 name. Love me your beard. Say her name. Sandra Bland. Could be say her name. Kimberly King. Say her name. Iona Jones. Say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Say her name. There's power in the name. Say her 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 name. There's power in the name. Say her name. Say her name. There's power in the name. Say her name.
Hey. See, Dr. Smith, we need a B3 Hammond for you to jump on it and just to shout us on out of here. Hey, thank you all so very much. I think we got some albums for sale in the back. Thank you to Kayla for being like the dopest
everything.
Road manager. Bestie, get yourself dressed or I'm going to punch you in your stomach. Friend in the world. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank all of y'all. And your own Dr. Amber Smith.
Y'all want to buy albums? Is that a thing? We have some options. It's okay if you don't want to. We just don't want to worry about it if it's not a thing. Thank you.
And there's food in the back. If you don't eat it here, take it with you.
It's actually already accounted for.
There are to-go plates back there, so please take some. And thank you all for joining us through all of this.
Thank you so much. I recorded it all, but it was so good. You made me cry. I don't like y'all.
They said it couldn't be done.
I had to cry.
So much. Thank you for the water.